is a world.
This is a world premiere.
This is a world premiere.
I done been through a whole lot, trial, tribulation, but I know God.
Hey, Reg here, and welcome back to the blog and the return of the Fruitarian. It's day 39, and it's actually day 39 of my 60-day raw food challenge, and things still are, things are going really smoothly. I am really kind of excited because something's going on in the vegan community. Yesterday when I was, looking at some of the blogs, the vegan blogs, I was checking out Unnatural Vegan, who's, somebody that I really respect and dig as a blogger for the information that she brings and the wealth of knowledge that she brings to the conversation about veganism. And there seemed to be some exchange going back between her and Check Your Activism, who I had not heard about before the mention on Unnatural Vegan's blog. And apparently there were some comments about race that came up, and I just want to say that I appreciate Check Your Activism for really trying to insert race, or to bring the conversation about race into the conversation about veganism, because I feel like it's really difficult to discuss food choices without talking about the food system and food access. And once you start talking about food access, it's hard not to see how race becomes a factor. And so with that in mind, first of all, I made a lot of notes, and so I'm going to be reading from them, so you'll have to forgive me, but it's mostly so that I don't just go off on tangents here, but I really kind of I want to try to keep this focused, because it is a delicate topic, and it is one that seems to raise emotions in people, and it should. It's a political tactic that was intended to appeal to people on an irrational and emotional level. And so first, to understand where I'm coming from, I want to just look at the definition of race, and I'm going to pull one. I pulled one from Webster's Dictionary online, and they define racism as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. That racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. And so just starting with that, you can understand how, this is going to be a really touchy topic, but first of all, I think there needs to be a distinction between being a racist and reacting to being the target of racism. They're different things, and it's understanding that when people of color express rage against white people, and I'm putting white in quotations because, again, we're getting back to the idea of race as a construct. So there really is no being white, but there's, this idea of whiteness that's part of the construct of racism. So expressing rage against white it's not based on beliefs about inherent traits, but against the fact of white privilege, and even more against the way that certain people exercise that privilege. The white race was invented as a ruling class social control formation in the late 17th and early 18th century in European American colonies, plantation colonies. And it was primarily used to drive a wedge between African slaves, or slaves who were descendants of Africa, who originated in Africa, and poor working class Anglo-Americans who would otherwise have identified with the plight of the slaves, or African Americans who were living as indentured servants before really slavery was the institution that it was on the level that it became an institution. So working class European Americans were offered white skin privilege as a wage from the ruling class to prevent the development of, working class consciousness and to stop working class people from working in tandem to better their circumstances. So white supremacy is a belief system that accompanies white skin privilege. So regardless of whether a person, regardless of whether a person who's identifying as white, regardless of whether they like or dislike so-called black people, those people identifying as white have bought into a belief system, one that offers the label of whiteness and bestows privilege on those who wear it. And it's a system that has diminished the value of those who are not, or those who do not wear that label, whiteness. It may be that people who claim the label whiteness just aren't aware of its dubious origins. I highly recommend exploring Theodore W. Allen's Class Struggle and the Origin of Racial Slavery, the Invention of the White Race. The idea of race as a construct is actually born out of Allen's 40 years of exploration. This topic has also been covered in the works of W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, David R. Roediger, and the author Toni Morrison. Now, when people say race is a construct, there's a sin of omission. Because instead we might say race was constructed, which leads us to question by whom and for what purpose. And once we start a discussion about that, we might begin to understand why people who have been labeled non-white experience so much frustration in a society that exists within the construct of race. I'm going to include a link to an expert from a talk that was given by anti-racism activist and writer Tim Wise that I hope you'll check out. So, I'm not going to take sides in, the discussion or the argument or whatever is going on between Unnatural Vegan and check your activism, but I will say Unnatural Vegan has been so careful to bring into these discussions so many facts, and maybe there's an emphasis on science, and maybe there isn't a lot of science to back a conversation about race, but there is a history of racism, and for Unnatural Vegan to use the phrase race is a construct without really going into how it was constructed, I think on her part was a little bit of a sin of omission, and I'd love to see her cover this topic in depth because I think she'd do an amazing job of it. That said, what am I listening to? I've been listening to, here it is, it's Dillon Francis, a recent album. It's actually a mixtape, I believe, and it's called This Mixtape Is Fire, and it's just good old-fashioned like house music, good old-fashioned dance hall, a really good listen, and so I'll include a link to it here. That said, I hope you all have an amazing day, and keep loving yourselves. And this is Reg checking out on day 39 of my 60-day raw food challenge. Peace.
Guns and